All right, here we are in chapters 7 and 8 of Aidan of Oren, Elf Princess. And just a quick review of what happened in chapter 6. Aidan went into the Hall of Judges, where the character, not Sebastian Fry, Gnome is. And inside, Gnome is talking to him. Gnome says that he's his apprentice, and he's going to teach him some things. So here we have Aidan looking at someone under a sheet, and he hears the words, "Who am I?" echoing around the room. Not necessarily coming from what's under the sheet, but kind of a strange situation. Charles shocked. It winds up that it is this character under the sheet. His name is Elijah. He is a character, a beast, a friend of Gnomes, from some people, some beings from the line of Cuchulainn. He's the last of his kind. They used to be a very handsome creature with also a warlike side, but they were killed off, they were misunderstood, and all is left is the warlike side. He's a ferocious beast that can destroy everything in his path. That's why he is bound with a chain and a metal collar around his neck, and he's full of nasty teeth and kind of a fearsome creature. And that's what's there, and he's scared. He wants to eat Charles, so Charles fainted from fright. Brings us up to chapter 7, and chapter 7 is called The Elf Princess. Here we go. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of musical instruments. "Where's that music coming from?" asked Aidan. "See," said him again, flashing his yellowish screen. "You asked a question." Charles started again.
Where the blazes am I?"
he demanded. "There's no time for that now," said Aidan, as he whisked the falcon off the table and onto his shoulder. "Let's go see what's happening outside." Gnome led the way to the door and slowly opened it, revealing the blinding light of day. "I can hardly see," said Aidan, putting his hand up to block the unyielding sun. He walked down a few steps and looked around. The music is getting louder. Something's definitely coming." He turned to see that Gnome had started to make his way back inside the door. "Where are you going?" asked Aidan in a panic. "Ha," said Gnome as he turned to close the door. "You asked another question. Keep them coming, young Aidan. Do not be afraid to ask the hard ones." "But," cried Aidan as the door started to close, "how can I ask questions if you're not with me?" He quickly slid his foot inside the door to keep it from closing. Gnome's nose and whiskers peeked out through the opening, right in Aidan's face. "It's not important to whom you ask the questions, only that you ask questions." But when? When do I ask the questions?" The mouse's whiskers were tickling Aidan's cheek as he whispered, "We'll always ask questions, but when the time is within the time, then you will know it's time to ask the hard question." "What does that mean?" Aidan removed his foot from the door. "It means exactly what it means, young Aidan. When the time is within the time. Don't worry, you'll know." Thud. The door closed. Gnome's voice had gone silent. Aidan turned his head and looked at Charles, who was glaring at him. The falcon cleared his throat and then spoke slowly in a very dry voice.
Don't you ever take me back in there."
Aidan slowly descended down the steps and proceeded up the street of the Haven. The music was getting louder. Suddenly, Aidan heard footsteps behind him. He turned just in time to catch Mackenzie jumping into his arms. She's coming now," squealed the excited 7-year-old. The music that you hear is being played by the best elf musicians in the land." Aidan put me down and could see that she was not alone. Lily, Damon, Sebastian Fry, and little Frederick followed behind. He took Mackenzie's cheeks in his hands. "You will never believe what I saw in that building." "Well, not now," said Mackenzie as she pulled away and continued walking up the street. "She's right," said Lily as she approached Aidan. "We have also seen some strange things today. There will be much to talk about tonight, but for now I think something amazing is about to happen." Aidan noticed that Sebastian Fry, Damon, and Frederick had followed Mackenzie up the street. With a wink, he grabbed Lily's hand, and the two of them ran to catch up with the group. They all stopped in front of the building where baskets were made. For around the corner they could see the first few musicians of what seemed to be an oncoming parade. The music was unlike any that the children had ever heard before. Harmonies from a multitude of stringed instruments were delicately woven with the precise plucking of harps. Soft wind instruments could also be heard, sounding somewhat like flutes and oboes. It was soothing, yet contained of air and of excitement. Lily and Mackenzie were talking quietly together and laughing in anticipation of the elf princess, who was about to appear. Aidan's attention was broken as the door to the basket shop slowly opened. A female elf emerged, holding the hands of two elf children that seemed to be squabbling over a small basket. She led them out into the street, trying desperately to turn their attention toward the oncoming parade. Her efforts were in vain, however, for the children, each holding on to the basket, were obsessed with having the woven prize for their own. Their antics amused Aidan, as he recalled similar quarrels with Lily and Mackenzie when they were younger. He looked down the street, noting that the tables had been lined up, and were now graced with all kinds of fruit and bread. The tableware, which shimmered in the afternoon sun, looked to be made of pure silver. Everything was perfect. The two elf children, still fighting over the basket, fell over each other in the street and accidentally bumped into one of the tables. The crowd hushed. Even the two children stopped suddenly and turned their attention down the street. Aidan looked up, just in time to notice a sight he would never forget. 4 stout little elves came around the corner at the base of the street, carrying a most magnificent chair, one woven by nature itself. Even more magnificent was the one sitting in the chair. "The elf princess," he gasped. The elves that bore her chair stopped. She gracefully stood and faced the elves that swarmed around her. Her long, dark hair and wispy clothing blew gently in the wind as she stood in silence, lovingly laying her hands on the heads of those closest. All right, so here is the sketch, the illustration of what was just read. So the musicians are playing, and we look around and people waving, and here is the elf princess being carried by 4 stout elves. I'm not sure how stout they look in that picture, but nonetheless she is being carried and she's waving like a parade, and all of the elf people around are waving in anticipation and excitement. Always when I notice illustrations like this, I've heard that many illustrators will put personal things that are a part of their lives into the picture. I always wonder about that dog right there. Sorry, I was blocking it. This dog right here. I wonder if the illustrator, if they have a dog that looks like that and they incorporated her into the picture. Or if the illustrator made one of the children in the image look like one of his or her own children. She was taller, the elf princess now. She was taller than all of the elves. Her eyes were large, dark, and piercing. As she began to slowly make her way up the street, the little elf band started playing again. Laughter filled the haven as the elves pressed in to be close to the princess. Without saying a word, she walked up to Mackenzie and Lily and nodded approvingly.
I don't know what all the fuss is about,
started Charles. "Not now, Charles. Not now," whispered Aidan. The elf princess approached Aidan and Sebastian Fry. Aidan did not know what to say. He felt awkward. Sebastian Fry stepped forward. "We welcome you with open arms. You grace our home with warmth and charm. This stranger from a distant land wishes now to kiss your hand." "What?" cried Aidan, completely startled, as the elf princess slowly offered her hand. Sebastian Fry reached back and pulled Aidan forward, motioning with his head that this was something Aidan needed to do, and now. Aidan reached for the elf princess's delicate white hand and kissed it softly. He looked up to see her gazing right through him. Although again startled, he maintained his composure and stepped backward, bowing slightly in an attempt to be polite. The elf princess raised her hands and turned around, which silenced the crowd and the band. "You honor me in word and deed. I want for not a thing. Your hearts are filled with goodness. From afar I hear you sing. And so tonight let's celebrate the coming of the one, prophesied to end the curse and fill the shadow with the sun." Marking the end of the chapter. Chapter 8, called Frederick the Juggler. "Fill the shadow with the sun," asked Aidan. "Sebastian, what does she mean?" The leader of the elves clapped his hands 3 times and shouted, The time has come to sit and feast. Let every man and every beast take this time to share and laugh. Come near, come far, come from yonder path. Jesters that play and singers that hum, take your place in the show to come. All others, please move in stride, and now be seated at the table side. Even as Sebastian Fry finished his last words, elves started moving in from all directions. They were coming to the haven to sit at the table for the great celebration. Other elves could be seen walking toward them in groups. Aidan could hear some of the groups singing softly together. Other groups could be seen juggling strange objects, practicing for the events to come. Most of the elves were bringing small chairs and seating themselves at the table. Since the tables were so low, Aidan, Lily, and Mackenzie sat on the ground next to them. The elf princess had returned to her chair, which was now seated at the far end of the table where the haven began. Once she started eating, all the elves started helping themselves to the bounty of food before them. The children, still trying to make sense of their surroundings, started eating as well. They watched with amusement as the elves put on a musical production planned long ago for this very occasion. Court jesters, acting silly, kept the elf crowd laughing between songs. Then, in a touching moment, little Frederick approached the elf princess and bowed. He pulled 3 peculiar bluish stones out of his pocket and attempted, with very little success, to juggle them. Aidan and the girls watched in tender music as Frederick tried time and time again to successfully juggle the stones, only to drop them repeatedly on the ground. The elf princess started clapping softly, and soon everyone seated at all of the tables clapped also, giving little Frederick a well-deserved ovation. "What an amazing day this has been," whispered Lily to Aidan. "I agree," blurted in Mackenzie between bites of a small loaf of bread in her hands. "It has been a day I will never forget." "Shh," scolded Lily. "Quiet. They're trying to put on a show for the princess." "Her name is Lyra," whispered Mackenzie. "Isn't that the most beautiful name you've ever heard?" Charles hopped off of Aidan's shoulder and walked over beside Mackenzie, who, in her excitement, was dropping crumbs everywhere. Damon sat across from Aidan, next to Sprite. Aidan noticed that the little dragon seemed to watch all of the activities with great interest. "What are you thinking, Damon?" he asked. Damon cocked his head to the side. "I'm learning," he said, then redirected his attention back to the elves. Aidan laughed, although his head was still spinning from the events of the day. His attention was drawn to Sebastian Fry, now seated silently beside him. The little leader of the elves was not eating. Rather, he looked away, as if he was sad. His thoughts were obviously somewhere else. "Sebastian," said Aidan, "what's wrong? This is supposed to be a day of celebration." The little elf stared straight forward, not saying a word. "Well, come on," coaxed Aidan. I heard what I said. What's this about filling the shadow with the sun?" He laughed, trying to make light of the situation. I'm supposed to learn something, you know. I'm getting tired of playing the hero." Sebastian Fry still did not respond. "What's wrong, my friend?" asked Aidan, this time with more sensitivity. The little elf turned his head slightly, although still not looking at Aidan. I'm hopeful that the prophecy is true, but it's too late for me." "What do you mean it's too late for you?" asked Aidan. Sebastian Fry turned to walk away, but Aidan stopped him and bid him to sit back down at the table. "Questions will not help you now, but one can hope and pray. The future is what matters most. The past has gone away." "Sebastian," insisted Aidan, "I've been told to ask questions. Please tell me what you're talking about. How has the past gone away?" The little elf wiped a tear from his cheek. 7 years and endless tears have crossed the hands of time since I held Matthias, the only son of mine. A quiet night, so innocent, he was the very first, until, alas, more disappeared to feed the shadow's thirst. "No," gasped Aidan, not knowing what else to say. He leaned over to hug the now weeping Sebastian Fry. "No," he gasped again. He closed his eyes as his face wrenched with pain. The young boy's heart was torn between anger and compassion. How could this happen? Not to Sebastian, not to any of these precious people. Aidan could feel that the wind had started blowing quite hard. He opened his eyes to see that the sky had darkened. Those sitting around the table had become silent. All that were seated, including Lyra, Lily, and Mackenzie, were staring at him. Horribly embarrassed and still very upset, Aidan quitted the table and entered the woods behind the library, where he could be alone to think. Seating himself on a tree stump, Aidan turned his back to the others. He could hear them whispering, and his imagination started getting the best of him, as he wondered what they could be saying. The crackling of twigs caught his attention. Someone was coming. He turned his head toward the library and saw that an elf was coming up the path. It was Frederick. The shy little elf walked up to Aidan and patted him on the knee. "Don't be sad. Don't be shy. You called the wind down from the sky. Your heart was touched, and you displayed something special on this day. Please be our guest. Please take your place, and let a smile ring on your face. As for me, it's time to go. My home is far away, you know." Aidan, wiping a tear away from his own eye, was astonished at the maturity of the small elf. "How can you be calm?" Aidan asked. "Aren't you afraid of the shadow? Aren't children still disappearing?" "Well, reality is what you see. Fear is not our rule. We simply go inside our homes when the daylight starts to cool." "But for 7 years, how can the elves bear such a curse?" "We choose a path of happiness, regardless of the curse. Day by day we celebrate by singing of a verse that tells a winding tale of one that soon will come, who holds the hope of everyone to fill the shadow with the sun." "There it is again, that statement," exclaimed Aidan. "Does that refer to me?" Little Frederick just shrugged his shoulders. "The food is almost gone," came a familiar voice from behind him. Aidan turned to see Mackenzie waving from the table, trying to get his attention. "Come on, Aidan, don't spoil the party. We're waiting for you." Frederick jumped down from Aidan's knee and started walking away. "Hey, I've got a few more questions for you," shouted Aidan after him. Frederick called back to him. "No, I'd like to stay, but they go away." The little elf turned and started running down the path. Just then Aidan noticed movement over by the library. He focused his eyes on the lower corner of the building. He could faintly see a window with iron bars. He rubbed his eyes in disbelief as he realized what else he saw. The creature from the library was standing behind the window in what must have been a lower portion of the building, reaching through the bars as he watched Frederick scurry down the path. The creature appeared to desperately want to get to the little elf, but the bars held fast. Suddenly, the creature turned its attention to Aidan, and they locked eyes. The creature slowly pulled its arms back inside the building and slipped into the darkness. Aidan took a few steps back toward the tables where everyone else was eating, afraid to take his eyes off of the building. He tripped on a tree root, almost losing his balance, then turned and hurried out of the woods. Chapter end.